my name's Jacquie Lawrence, pronouns she, her, and I'm delighted to be hosting this very special edition of the Peccadillo Social Club. Tonight we're going to be talking all things Blue Jean, the sensational, award-winning, BAFTA-nominated, lesbian-themed feature film. And I'm delighted to be joined by the crew and the team behind the movie. We have Georgia Oakley, who is the writer-director. It's hard to believe that it's Georgia's debut feature. Georgia has a plethora of award-winning short movies to her name, and she's joined with her producer, Hélène Sifre, who again has a legacy of award-winning short movies, but also animation series and an action series. And our final guest is Professor Catherine Lee, who is Deputy Dean at Anglia Ruskin University. She's active in diversity and inclusion, and she's published several books. The last one, Pretended, I think was published in April of this year. If you haven't seen Blue Jean, you really are in for a treat. And if you have seen Blue Jean, then we're going to have a look at the trailer now, just to remind you how sensational it is. But we're thrilled to have all three of you here tonight.
I need you in two teams. Jimmy, can you get over here? Mike, over there.
So, what do you do, Jean?
I'm a teacher.
Fantastic. What do you teach?
P. Lewis, come on in.
You got a man on the scene at the moment, then?
No, I haven't, no.
You do realise that they fill our tellies with this here to distract us from what's really going on?
Not everything is political.
Of course it is.
Here at home, there's been another big demonstration against Clause 28, which seeks to stop councils from promoting homosexuality.
I've been saying this is a good idea for years. Young people have such vulnerable minds.
Can anyone tell me what fight or flight means? Fight or flight.
What's wrong? You look stressed.
I don't want my students on every part of my life.
Every part of your life?
If anyone found out, I'd never work again.
The gay and lesbian lifestyle is not natural or normal, and it never will be.
What I don't get is how two girls actually...
Just ignore them.
So you did?
I'm not talking about me.
What kind of example are you setting for her?
Just because I don't parade my sexuality around like a badge of honour.
How is that girl ever going to learn that she has a place in this world?
Or she thinks she has a place in this world.
You're the one with the problem, not me.
This isn't a game, Lois. It's me life.
She reminded me a bit of you, you know. A deer in the headlights.
I'm not a deer in headlights, am I?
Sometimes.
I'm damaged. And in a way you're not. At least you don't have to be.
If I don't have to be, then why do you?
It's mind-blowingly fantastic. I don't know if I mentioned that it is multi-award winning the People's Choice at Venice, and it is BAFTA nominated, and so it should be. And Georgia, it's big to say that a film really speaks to you, but this one really does. And I've heard you say that you don't see the film so much as just a straight historical film, but a film that has a dialogue, has a conversation to a certain time in lesbian history, and that really, that conceit really works. I also looked at your bio and saw that you were actually born in almost the exact year that the film took place. So although it's not your personal history, the authenticity really bleeds through. So I just want to ask, what was it? What was that spark? Was it a word or an article? What was the spark that ignited this film for you?
Well, I guess thematically, just even looking back at the trailer there, I can sort of remember back to the time when we started developing the film in 2018, and Hélène and I were talking a lot about some of the themes that are in the film, this question of how we play different roles in different parts of our lives, and also this sort of intergenerational aspect of queerness and how what we pass on to the generation below us. Someone said the other day, I can't remember who said this to me, but about how it sort of takes about 15 years for a generation to sort of change in most places, but in the queer community it takes about 4 years for things to change, so much that the people 4 years younger than you or older than you have had that much of a different experience. I'm not articulating that very well, but you see what I mean. And I was thinking a lot about that and how not enough attention perhaps is given to combing through these moments in our history and trying to understand exactly what was happening. I think I was feeling a big pressure at that time as a queer filmmaker to sugarcoat the queer experience and to focus on the more joyful aspects of the queer experience. And although I think that is absolutely vital, and I'm glad to be seeing more of that, I just felt also that as a person and as a filmmaker, I wasn't done with the more kind of angsty side of what queerness meant to me. So those things were all kind of swimming around in my brain. And around that time, I found an article about the women who had abseiled from the House of Lords gallery into the House of Lords during the debate on Section 28. And that just got everything moving, really, because it seemed a very clear way to explore these themes that I'd already been thinking about, but through a particularly heightened lens. And for me to be able to kind of look at not only what it might have been like for a teacher during that time, but what it would be, what it must have been like for the students that were impacted by this sort of culture of silence that was propagated by Section 28. And yeah, I was born in 1988, which meant that I was at school almost for the duration of the law itself. So I do know, I feel like the attitudes that we communicate in the film, this idea that you can kind of do what you want behind closed doors, but please don't thrust it in our children's faces, that kind of thing. I remember that as being very much the feeling and the attitudes that I grew up with. So it didn't feel particularly historical to me. It felt like already these two moments in time were very much in dialogue with each other because of things that were going on politically. And so we started getting to work with research, which included meeting Catherine and a number of other women who gave us their amazing, shared their stories with us and insights and sometimes diary entries and their own research that they had conducted.
So Jean is a composite of a group of women that you spoke to, including Professor Catherine Lee, who is one of the consultants, but also is, I noticed, a supporting artist, as a very gracious netball player. I mean, what was the research and development process? You said that it took 4 years, but I mean, how many women did you talk to, and how did you use, as I say, the stories as a composite for a very incredible, leading role?
Well, Hélène and I started with a very tight deadline that we had to hit. We had to kind of establish what the story might be in only a couple of weeks. And so we had a kind of bare bones framework after finding some interviews online with lesbian PE teachers who had experience working during that time. And so the rough outline of the story was kind of there. And then we began a very intense research phase of which spanned the whole 4-year development, really. There were things that were added to the film right at the end when we happened to be introduced to somebody who had an insight into something, and we liked something that they told us, and we put it into the film. So it was an ever-evolving process, and there wasn't really, in terms of the character of Jean, I would say she was pretty formed in my mind. I knew that it would be an interrogation of one woman's life and choices, as opposed to focusing kind of more on the political side of things. And I knew that I wanted to look at this character and follow her as she makes some quite difficult decisions. And there were a number of different women's experiences that fed into that, as well as some of my own experiences, some of Hélène's experiences. But one particular moment that stands out in my mind was speaking to Catherine, who told us about how she had met a student in a bar and what had happened, what was the fallout from that experience, and how had she handled that situation, and how had she felt about that situation afterwards. And I remember we were very, very early on in the research phase, and we were on a development lab with BFI and BBC Films and Creative England, and we used Catherine's kind of testimony around this subject and explained how her story had made us feel, and sort of gave that as the reason that we wanted to tell the story.
In actual fact, we would love to show a clip which really illustrates that clash of the personal and the political, and the dilemma that gay, lesbian teachers faced. So if we can go to that clip now.
Jean Newman speaking.
Why, hello, baby Jane. Hello?
Spoke to Baldock this morning. He's approved those proposals you put forward. I know, I couldn't believe it either. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Aye.
Oh, hiya.
Hey, is Viv around?
Yeah, she's just in there.
Hiya.
Can't call me at work. I told you that.
Oh, why'd you have to be so uptight?
Do you know what? Yeah, I don't need this.
Hey.
You don't know what it's like for me.
I won't call you at work.
Okay.
Are you going to shut that door because you're letting the draft in?
It was open when I got here.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it
oh,
was.
Shut up. Come on.
Here you can see the real dilemma of somebody who's closeted, whose sexuality is silenced by the government, having a relationship with, a political dyke. I recognise that Women's Centre. Catherine, how much of this, I know Jean is a composite, but how much of yourself do you recognise in the character?
Yeah, a huge amount, and I vividly remember clips, things like we've just seen happening to me. Of course, the younger generation might forget that there was no mobile phones, there was no WhatsApp, there was and if somebody you'd met somebody on a Saturday night, and for example, and you'd happen to mention where you worked, they would possibly give you a ring at lunchtime or break time in the school to make contact with you, because that was often the way. So we were trying to sort of live this very sort of closeted life, yet the team wasn't there to help us be, discreet. So, I was fortunate enough to spend some time on set, and to spend some time with Rosie McEwen, who is just absolutely phenomenal as Jean. And I hadn't expected to being on set to affect me quite so much. I saw in Rosie's character as Jean this small, timid, frightened person who was leading this double life. I saw Rosie embody all those conversations we'd had about me being permanently 2 sentences ahead of myself and flipping any question that came my way around what I'd done at the weekend or who I lived with or who I was going on holiday with. And when I was on set and saw how frankly desperately unhappy Jean was, it was a lot to see. It's a real cliche to say it's an Ebenezer Scrooge moment, but in some ways that's what it felt like. I was transported back into this gym set in the 1980s with, I remember saying to all the fantastic netballers in the shots, I had those trainers, I had that sweatshirt, it really was vividly like being back in the time. And to see somebody living a desperately unhappy life was really, really difficult to revisit sometime later, particularly knowing that, no PE teacher was ever prosecuted or lost their job as a consequence of Section 28, and what a waste of time and energy all that hiding was.
Yeah. I dated teachers and social workers in the Northeast, and yes, I'm sure I've committed more. So, but taking it to the regions, this is a question for Hélène and Georgia, taking it to the regions, how important was that in terms of the story? Certainly the landscape is just, and although it's not historical to a certain, but it is set in a time. There are indicators. There's the art, as you say, the costume. There's the archive. There's the radio. Well done on finding pieces of the Northeast haven't been modernized. But I guess in a way, this is kind of a producer question. How difficult was it to make a historical film, a low-budget historical film work, given all of the challenges around clearances and?
Yeah, I think when back in 2018, when we started the development of the project, because I'd never been to Newcastle before, Georgia took me on this early recce, and at the time, it felt like there was still a lot of places that still looked like the 80s. When we came back 5 years later, it had changed. So that was a bit of a surprise, I guess. And there's still so a lot of it was recreated, and credit to our production and costume and makeup team. They had to a lot of the locations, like the bar, the co-op, the school, they were just shells, and it's our production design team. Her house as well was an empty house pretty much, and they recreated that from scratch. So that was definitely a big pressure on the budget, but we had a really fantastic team who had worked together before on a project that shot before us but played after us at Sundance this year. And so yeah, that and I think Georgia's decision to shoot on 16mm also helped give it that instant 80s feel, and allowed us to cheat a little bit on some things. But yeah, I don't know if Georgia, you want to chat more about that.
Yeah, how can I ask you, Georgia, how important was it to tell this story outside London, outside? Why the North, or anywhere in the North? Why?
I don't think that it would have been possible to tell the story that we wanted to tell in London. When we started that research process, there were, as I said, many women whose lives were kind of feeding into the story that we were mapping out, and most of them, that there were kind of correlations between those stories. The sort of spiraling mental health that we look at in the film was something that came up time and again, no matter where said lesbian PE teacher was working. But there were also kind of discrepancies between those stories. As you would imagine, there was a north-south divide to those stories. As you would imagine, there was a kind of urban versus countryside school experience. And the story that we had really begun to hone in on was inspired mostly by women who had been working in urban settings in the north of England. And Newcastle actually hadn't come up, but Newcastle was somewhere that I knew from having lived there and having loads of family there, that I could imagine the kind of the landscape and the textures and how different locations might kind of speak to each other from my knowledge of the place. And that was important to me because well, yeah, I needed to have that kind of understanding in order to, the film is so much about the locations in terms of how moving the character from one space to another affects her, and how those locations kind of speak to each other and in dialogue with each other, as well as how different they are and what they add to the story. So much time was spent kind of building those worlds and talking about color palettes and talking about what the locations really mean to the character. And so yeah, for all those reasons, it had to be the Northeast. And once we'd started on that journey, it was such a joy to work with local crew and explore some of the parts of the Northeast that I wasn't so familiar with, and discover new parts, and also working with in the co-op and the bar that we show in the film, we worked with a lot of the queer community from Newcastle now, and that was really special and added such an extra kind of dimension to those scenes. So yeah, it was a really positive experience.
We're going to go to where we'll see some of the extras as well. We're going to go to a scene which we see the reportage of Clause 28 and the impact on Jean.
The afternoon's business in the House of Lords was brought to an abrupt halt by three young women who launched a commando-style raid on the chamber. They abseiled down ropes from the public gallery, landed on the floor among a chamber full of startled peers, and were hustled out by Black Rod and several doorkeepers. It was a protest against the clause in the local government bill which curbs the promotion of homosexuality by councils.
We care on this side first and foremost about children. We care about the perpetuation of the heterosexual normal family as the basis of civilized society here and in other countries.
Well, David Koss is in our Westminster studio now. David, exactly what happened?
You wouldn't want to bump into them women in a dark alley. They'd have your guts for garters, wouldn't they? Yeah?
I've been saying this is a good idea for years. Young people have such vulnerable minds.
Well done today, ladies. Time I get changed.
Who were the beers? What about you, Lewis? What's your type?
Yeah, what's your type?
Yeah, oh wait, tell us.
Yeah, what's your type?
No, wait. You prefer them a bit more.
Fuck off.
Or is it the managed ones that do it for you?
Whatever.
Oh, come on, we've just been saying what we like. Now it's your turn. Fair dues.
Yeah, come on.
Tell us, Lois. What I don't get is how two girls actually like, and there's a lot of this.
So I think you see from there, not just, as you said, Georgia, not just the impact on the teachers, but also that the clause facilitated bullying. The acting is amazing. You talked about working with people from the area. Can you talk a little bit more about the casting and what that process was, and why you went with the actors?
Yeah. Well, we started casting during lockdown, so the process was a little bit strange to begin with. And we cast Rosie first, and that was just a really quite a simple kind of conventional casting, really, in terms of the fact that she sent in a tape, and she just, I mean, you see in that clip, she just has this incredible stillness and the ability to communicate all these complex emotions that are going on under the surface without really doing very much or seeming to do very much. And that was so important. I mean, the script is, that's a good clip really to show how much of it is about what's not being said. And I remember people often saying how many kind of looks there were between characters and how much that was kind of pushing the story forward, but how, you know, it might be quite difficult to handle. So we were really looking for actors who, well, I always want to find actors who energetically suit the person that I have in my mind, you know, and who are coming at the performance without having spoken to me, that they have read the script and they are coming at it with an understanding that feels kind of innate, so that there isn't a lot of explaining that has to be done. It's just a question of working together once they've been cast to kind of build the character up from that starting point. And that was very much the case for Rosie and Kerry and all the other leads. Those actors just kind of stepped into those roles, and even if they had to have some quite drastic kind of makeovers, because they didn't necessarily look like that, energetically in the room, the feeling was right and the dynamics were right. So with Kerry, for instance, it was important for me that there was an age gap between those two actors. The characters had an age gap, and it was important that the character of Viv would kind of be very disarming and have this kind of hold over Jean and allow her to let out a slightly more kind of naive, silly side that we don't really see because she's so preoccupied with everything else that's going on in her life. And it was a difficult role to cast, because finding somebody that had all of the attributes we were looking for was hard. But yeah, again, Kerry just arrived in the room, and it wasn't just Rosie that she was disarming, you know, she just sort of walked straight into the room. And I remember it was, again, COVID, everyone had masks, and she was just like straight in hugging everybody and kind of charmed everyone basically in the same way that the character might. So yeah, it was really thrilling to cast those two and get working on rehearsals with them. And for the younger cast, we auditioned I don't know, maybe 600. We got tapes from hundreds, can't remember how many hundreds now, but hundreds and hundreds of kids, mainly from the north and Scotland, who would first tape and just tell us a bit about themselves. And then if we saw something in those videos, we then asked them to tape a scene, and then we did some callbacks finally in London, and that's how we found Lucy, who plays Lois. And through that process is also how we found Siobhan, and they had such an incredible chemistry. Yeah.
No, it just what you're saying. I think I'm being told to play another clip here, and then we'll come back to questions, because I really want to talk about, you know, the political versus the personal, and how that manifested itself on screen without having to have massive crowd scenes of protest, etc. So the next clip is let's play it. It's the best thing. Let's play it.
I'm Marika. Do I call you Sister Marika? It sounds weird when you say it.
Thank you, our Father, for this food you've blessed us with this evening. Thank you for choosing us to be your witnesses.
Isn't it beautiful? Are you trying to convert me? Not unless you want me to. Do you recognize yourself as a sinner?
I do.
Have you repented of your sins?
Okay, that wasn't a clip. That was a trailer for the new Peccadillo release, which is called You Can Live Forever, and you can see it it's out on June the 16th in the cinemas. And now we can talk about the actual next clip. If we can go to that now, please.
Can I show you something quickly while they're out there? I bought something for Tim for our anniversary, but I really need a second opinion.
Thought I'd asked you to get rid of this.
Oh, I love that one. You look so happy. Yeah, I know. Please. I don't have any recent ones. And I miss your hair like that.
You sound like Mum.
How would you know? You never go and see her.
Don't like seeing it there. What?
I don't know, it's... Well, it's not as if everything that came before is, a lie.
What are you talking about?
I don't think it's right you want to erase part of your life. You expect us to?
I thought I just asked you to replace one photograph.
You know what I mean.
Well, I don't, actually.
You're trying to erase your marriage.
Am I now?
Don't be a child. Why didn't you tell me you went alone the other night?
What?
Sammy told me you had a woman there. Look, what you do in your own home is your own business. You know I'm supportive of it. But Sammy's only 5. It's confusing for him. You wet the bed. He never wets the bed.
His grandmother had just been rushed to hospital.
I just don't think it's fair for you to put me in that position.
She actually left right after you dropped him off.
Okay, but... Do you see, it's hard for me, to trust you. So... Come on, who is she then?
This clip, I think, is again about the personal, the political being played out. So it almost looks as if Jean has got some kind of political, not aspirations, but she's actually able to be out with her family. She's got that incredible backstory. She's made the break, but she just can't go any further. She can't talk about her relationship. Where did that backstory come from? Why was the decision, and I'm opening this out, why is the decision to create a marriage that should be married? Where did all that feed from?
I guess I was interested in the fact that coming out is always depicted as this one-time thing, or often. And Hélène and I were speaking a lot about how that just isn't the case. Coming out is a kind of everyday reality for most queer folks. So I guess I was thinking about the fact that it was something I was seeing in the world around me, and also in my own life, that once you have come out, you've kind of made this big step, but often then you are kind of too new to really transition into this new world that you think you've become a part of, but you have left behind the old world. And I was just really interested in the kind of gray area of that, and so that kind of came more from my life than anything else. I thought it was a way to... I also knew that these sorts of microaggressions that Jean experiences, the subtlety of that homophobia is something that I believed anyone who had any experience of being othered for any reason would be able to relate to, and it might be something that would kind of break away from this so-called kind of coming out trope, that it would move the poignancy of that from something specific to being queer into something that could relate to anyone who had ever been othered, because I've been in scenarios where that sort of thing has happened, not just on the basis of queerness, but a million other reasons as well. So yeah, that was, and in terms of her marriage, I really just enjoy revealing things about a character kind of further into a story than you might expect, and then not really taking it anywhere. I don't know. I think it's just one of the fun things you get to do as a storyteller, and as somebody who came out quite late in life, relatively speaking, I had experience of what she's going through in that scene, and so it was personal to me.
It is interesting where you talk about that kind of personal erasure as well as the political erasure. And I think going back to something I want to talk about earlier, which is that you see her turmoil, her conflict played out so beautifully, just with the facial expressions, that at no point you wanted to go to as I said, what was happening politically at that time. So, you know, there was no protest. We didn't see the march in Manchester. There wasn't anything around Greenham. Was that conscious, or was that a budgetary issue?
That was, well, Hélène and I kind of worked we were trying to kind of find a balancing act, I guess. We didn't want to tell a story about this subject matter without alluding to the amazing reactionary movement that arose as a result of this law coming in. But so there were versions of the script that had, I don't know if there was a version of the script with a march, but there was definitely a march in the original treatment. And then until very, very late, I think until we shot it, we did intend to use, I really hoped to find archive footage of a march that had happened in Newcastle, and a very particular speech made by a particular person that I'd found in the archives. And I wanted to find video footage of that speech, and it was just not something that we managed to find. So it became, and also then when we were editing, it became clear that that just wasn't this film. For a while, I was sort of toying with the idea of bringing in the abseilers, the House of Lords scene where they throw themselves off the gallery of the House of Lords, and it took a lot to sort of say, actually, no, that's not what we're trying to do here. As amazing as that is, that's another film. And around that point, Hélène and I talked about wanting to make a documentary simultaneously, because we found that we just had so much material that we were having to leave out, because we had decided that this would be a portrait drama of one woman. And that, but I think also because of the club and the bar and the film and the co-op, by the time we got towards the end of post, it did feel like we had done what we set out to achieve in terms of bringing in that community element and the importance of it without having to show the marches and things like that. And what we were interested in really was that the women we were speaking to were not able to participate in those marches for obvious reasons. So it didn't really make sense to show it.
Yeah. I can see you nodding, and Catherine and Hélène. I mean, it must have been, it must have solved one nightmare. I know that you use the archive, the radio archive, and a television clip really, really well, but not to actually have to stage a massive march. I don't know if there was a march in Newcastle then, actually. I think it was the Manchester march that I think got a lot of the attention. But just in terms of, if I can talk to you, Hélène, just really again about how difficult, or was it, to produce something that is so historical without having to use a lot of archive, a lot of music?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, finding those archives, even though there aren't many clips in the end, but we researched hundreds of clips, and and throughout the edit, they changed constantly, because it was, like Georgia said, it was a balancing act of finding clips that weren't too shocking, or that didn't push the film too much into melodrama, but also that were relevant to the time. And so I would say, for me as a producer, like, it's clearing those archives that was definitely the hardest thing. It's other things, like, which I hadn't thought about, but anything that plays on television, anything that you see, like a newspaper, a billboard, like all of this needed clearing, and sometimes because it was actual things from the 80s, tracing back the owners of, you know, the intellectual property of those documents was extremely difficult. And there's a lot of things that we just couldn't clear in the end. So it was also like trying to, you know, manage this, and yeah, so that was the part of me wishes that we'd like stage a massive protest instead. Yes, it would have been probably more expensive, but you know, it might have been easier than like clearing Blind Date and
exactly. I think the beauty of it is to see the politics played out in the characters' relationship, and that, as you say, that community action. I want to go to Catherine now, because we've got a wonderful clip that's set in the co-op. And I'd like to talk to you afterwards about your involvement in the community, even though you weren't able to be political at work. So if you can show the bog fun clip, please.
Hey, you came!
Hiya.
Who's this one?
I'm Lois.
You're Lois. Welcome. Friend of Jean's then?
Speech! I just wanted to say, as some of you already know, money's been a little scarce this year, but thanks to the heroic efforts of the Bog Fund, we're able to throw a little something together. So, Debs, my love, these are for you. From all of us. Well, technically not from us, but they are for you. Love you, babe. Happy birthday to the Bog Fund! Right, now let's get fucked up! Hi, lady. We missed you.
All right. What's the Bog Fund? Right, so say you get kicked out by your parents, or you can't pay your rent or something, or you need a new pair of shoes, then you can ask for money from the Bog Fund.
Wait, so anyone can ask for money?
Yeah, well, any poor lesbians from the northeast.
Babes, you don't have a drink. Let's get you a drink.
I'll keep an eye on her.
Where'd the money come from?
People like her. Lesbians with proper jobs. Teachers, lawyers, whatever. They can put money in to, you know, help out those who are well hard up.
That's almost as if Jean that's her redemption in a way. And I'd like to talk to you, said Catherine, about how political could you be within the community?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the conversation you've just had around the march, you know, I was in the north of England, but my story takes place in Liverpool rather than in Newcastle. I distinctly remember the local women's bar that I went to, there being a coach trip down to Manchester to take part in the march there, and lots of people that I knew in that club, and you know, encouraging me to go along. And you know, I absolutely could not have been on that march. I'm so grateful. I'm still grateful to this day for those people that did march and those that did protest. But I couldn't be that. That couldn't be me. And actually, I remember being invited up to a kind of an organisation like the co-op that we see in the film, by somebody that I'd met in a bar on a Saturday night, and me and another PE teacher friend of mine actually went to this huge big house in Liverpool, and kind of were buzzed in and walked up these stairs to this room, and we could smell the weed and everything, and we were so frightened, we actually, or I don't know what we were. I think we were caught, just as Georgia mentioned before about the family and school, and Jean being caught between two worlds. We were caught between two worlds there, and we turned, actually, we never went in. And I think I was struck when I saw the co-op scenes in the film of actually we didn't fit in there either. It was kind of that feeling that, you know, we didn't fit in at school, we didn't fit in with our families, and actually we didn't really fit in the lesbian community. We were rubbish lesbians, you know. We didn't even do that very well. And that sense of always never being quite enough for these groups that we were permanently on the edge of.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting as well, and I think it is something that, Georgia, you've really handled very, very deftly, that there were divisions within the lesbian scene, definitely in the North, and during those times where there were divisions around class. So you would have working class women thinking that they didn't feel part of the middle class feminist lesbian movement. And you talk about the Bog Fund here, which I do remember being the Working Class Women's Fund, WC equals Bog in Newcastle, becoming the Bog Fund. But you've used it in such a way to illustrate that actually that is the only way that Jean feels that she could support Lewis and people like her, but it's not, there's no sense of any class divisions, and I think that's really quite a beautiful way of portraying it. Certainly in terms of portrayal and representation of working class women. Was that conscious, that you ignored any of the divisions, which were, you know, quite rigid divisions at times?
Yeah, I guess so, but it was also just it was also a case of kind of how many we struggled with, kind of how many different things you can kind of touch on in one story. And I think each scene has to have purpose and not be too confused, I guess. And with this scene with the Bog Fund, I didn't actually, I mean, it obviously does come across as being Jean's redemption in some way, but I also always thought about it more from the perspective of Lois and the fact that most queer people can remember a moment in their life where they stepped into a world in that way and had that realization that, you know, you might not be looked after by your family, you might not be looked after by society, you might not be looked after by the school that you're going to, but there are some people who've got your back. And the power of that feeling, and how that, because there was some discussion when we were developing the script about, you know, where we leave Lois at the end of the story and how difficult that is. But I believed that it was the truthful way to end that her story in this film. And for me, this scene is probably more about her. But yeah, in terms of the class divisions, it was something that we discussed during research, but I suppose the aim was to kind of hint at it rather than going fully in with it.
Which I think is rather wonderful, actually. We have audience questions up next. Just so you know, if you want to ask any of our guests any questions, then please do so. Do have one already, actually, which is a question from Renee. Georgia, you mentioned that you had your education under the restrictions of Clause 28. How do you feel that personally affected you?
Well, Hélène and I talked a lot about how, as I said, I came out relatively late in life, not late, but, you know, I would say about 10 years later than I might have had I grown up in a world where I had role models. You know, I remember being about 26 by the time I met a lesbian woman who was about 20 years older than me, who was married and had children. And I remember just, you know, it was like where I went to school, being a lesbian was just, you know, it was just not something that was spoken about, or if it was spoken about, it was spoken about in such a derogatory way. It was something that happened to other people. There were people in my school who just disappeared in the middle of a term, and later you'd find out that they'd come out and they just realized they couldn't really exist within that environment. And so, yeah, I think it had just a sort of, I think the silence of it really affected me personally, but also just it allowed the institutionalized state-sanctioned homophobia of that law allowed all of these attitudes to just sort of fester and grow within the public, you know, and that's still there, not as badly as it was then, I guess, but it is still there. And I think a lot of the crew that we worked with were shocked at times with how much of that still exists, how we were still being kind of sometimes yelled at in the street while we were filming, and that, you know, that the fact that those attitudes were cultivated and encouraged during that 15-year period has meant that there is a huge legacy that still survives today.
And as you say, there's still the dialogue, isn't there? There's still, you know, the trans issue in education. There's still the Florida bills. You know, it's not, the dialogue has not ended by any stretch of the imagination. No. And which is why this film is even more important. It seems, trying to go to this next question, but it is a lovely question from Sylvia, who says there seems to be colour themes of pastels throughout the film. Was that intentional? I do love the colour palette. Hélène, could you talk about that, perhaps?
I'd love to, but I feel like Georgia is probably best placed to talk about the colour palette, because that's something that she devised from the very beginning.
I was always very keen to kind of avoid some of the more classic 80s colors, the kind of more vivid neons, etc. I was attempting from the beginning to create something that felt authentically of its time, but that was also difficult to place, to encourage the kind of, I mean, I would say since 2018, when we started working on it, the parallels between what happens in the film politically and what's going on now have increased kind of tenfold. But in 2018, we were conscious that it was a film about a particular moment in time, and some people were thinking that it was quite kind of niche and that no one would care about this film. So there was an effort on my part to sort of potentially break it a little bit free of that moment and encourage conversation around what the similarities were from that time to today. But also I like the fact that most of the most hostile environments of the film are the ones that with the most kind of pastel color palettes, and I just liked what that does to the audience when you're watching it.
It's I mean, and also as well, I think that it does, you know, I read an interview where you said it really did kind of, you didn't want to create another film that was set in the 80s that was just full of colour, that was, you know, technicolor, because actually that's not what people's lives were. And this brings me to the next question from our audience. It's from Clarissa. And she'd like to ask Catherine, how different is it, do you think, for teachers now?
Yeah, I think in some ways it's hugely different. I think since I left teaching in 2010, I've kind of dedicated my career in some ways for making a generation of LGBT teachers don't feel as I felt. And one of the things I've been fortunate to do is to set up an LGBT leadership program for teachers, and it's been really fulfilling to work with people who are prepared to be their authentic selves and then, you know, step into leadership, whether that's head teacher or the senior roles in schools, and be the role models that I could never be. That said, when, you know, things go in circles in generations, as we mentioned earlier on, and you know, I remember the really divisive, dreadful, salacious headlines in the 1980s of this idea that the loony lesbians were going to, you know, corrupt all the children and young people in our schools. And I see the way in which the, you know, trans and non-binary identities are being treated at the moment in exactly the same way, and the frankly reckless and irresponsible tabloid, well, not even tabloid, quite honestly, broadsheet headlines that are again creating moral panic for parents. And you know, looking back, and I think something I've realised only through my involvement in Blue Jean is that there was no genuine concern in the 80s about impressionable young minds and irresponsible or you know, lesbian and gay teachers. We were caught in the collateral between the left and the uber right of Mrs. Thatcher's government. And, you know, if you stay long enough, things go full circle. And I see absolutely history repeating itself. There are no, you know, I don't believe that genuine concerns about trans and non-binary identities in schools are at the heart of the political debate that's going on. You know, the identities of those that section of our community are being used as a political football, and real people's lives are the collateral of being caught in the crossfire. And you know, that's without us turning to the USA and looking at the Don't Say Gay bills in Florida, which is, let's face it, Section 28 by another name.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we have time for one more question, if someone could get one to me. If anyone out there has a question, I would love to ask. Well, I don't think one's coming through. It's either my tech or it's probably my tech. So I guess I would like to ask what's next for everyone involved. You talked about, Hélène, you talked about a potential documentary. And I don't think we have. I don't think we have seen enough documentaries about that deal with lesbian history. You know, there's so much that needs to be told. For every 10 Oscar Wildes, we have one Gentleman Jack. So
someone is at one of the screenings of Blue Jean with the Q&A back in February. I met a woman, Sarah, who is actually making a documentary on Section 28 and the Don't Say Gay bill and like all of this part of history. I think, Catherine, you spoke with her as well. So it's in the works. And yeah.
Okay. Sounds exciting. I'm not going to push you on that. I think I'm being told, well, very, very quickly. Yes. What Georgia, Catherine, what do you have coming up? And then
as Hélène said, yes, I have been talking to Sarah about her documentary and really hoping that will be developed. Personally, for me, some of the diary entries that I shared with Hélène and Georgia, I decided on the back of Blue Jean that I ought to publish those. So I've recently published a book. I've called it Pretended because Section 28 said that schools must not promote homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. And I think pretending has been a theme throughout my my life as a teacher under Section 28. So I'm looking forward to promoting that over the summer.
And Georgia, finally, what's coming up?
I'm gearing up for the US release of Blue Jean in June. And in amongst Blue Jean stuff, I've been writing a new film and working on an adaptation of a book for another director to direct, which has been really good fun. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, listen, thank you. Honestly, I'm never, I really thoroughly enjoyed that. I got so many more questions to ask you. I have to say goodbye. I'm going to thank the BFI for their continued support of the Peccadillo Sofa Club. The Sofa Club is back next week for a special Sunday brunch edition. That's at 12:30 on the 21st, where we are talking about the short film Thrive and joined by the filmmakers. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you to our guests, and thanks for all of the people that ask questions. It's been a learning curve, technically wise, but love the content. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One, two, three, four.
I look at you and I want more.
We are all family here.
Just one more time, please.
It was a political act as well as just a purely sexual act.
Your change is inevitable.
There's a whole world of real men out there.
That was thrilling.
Can I take you for breakfast?
Let's find someplace quieter.
We'll find the freedom that we so desperately need.
Você é do tipo romântico.
Here we go, here we go!
I appear to be in love with you.
It is the ultimate connection.